Bokanyokong, and I'm Simply Label's daughter. Thank you for listening to my daddy's podcast. May God bless you. Hey, tada!
Ladies and gents, friends and family from my beloved South Africa and all over the world, wherever you're listening from, welcome to the 10th episode of the Simply Label podcast, or as we say it in our podcast, hey, tada! How was that voice note? I've got 3 kids, all right? I've got a son who's the eldest. His name is Luamkelo, followed by my 2 daughters, the first one being Letlotlo, who's 11 years old. And that beautiful little voice you've just heard is from my 5-year-old Bokang. She just melts my heart, especially that part when she says, hey, tada. Oh man, she's intelligent, she's amazing. And I know, some of you listening are like, yeah, all parents say that about their children. And that's so true, because I'm yet to meet a parent that says, my child is so stupid. Can you imagine that? But I must say though, I give all the credit to my beautiful wife, Masichaba, who takes time to lay down a solid educational background for all our kids. Kudos to you, babes, for what you do. I appreciate you. Ladies and gents, on that note, today is going to be another exciting one. We're going to talk about what I've titled The Science of Coaching and Personal Development. The science of coaching and personal development. Allow me to start here. Contrary to popular belief, your most important asset in business is not your educational background, intelligence or IQ, experience, past achievements, technical knowledge or know-how, etc. It's none of those. It is none of those. It is rather your ability to build meaningful relationships across all levels, underpinned by trust and competence. If you learn to build strong, meaningful relationships, you can build a strong, sustainable business. Allow me to say that last bit again. If you learn to build strong and meaningful relationships, you can build a strong and sustainable business. This principle applies, I dare say, to family, friendship, sport, business, government, etc., etc. At this point, allow me to go back to a principle that I shared about two or so episodes ago, briefly on our previous episode. I think we had titled that one, Great Culture plus Great Leadership equals Great Performance. In my reflection and listening to that particular episode, I realized that I've got to unpack in greater detail and greater granularity the principle that we have come up with at the Simply Label podcast that we have titled COINS. 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 And this is a principle, friends, that I believe personally, if put to the test by any would-be leader, by any newly appointed leader, or even an existing leader who has perhaps even taken over a new team, that if you put this principle to good use, I'm putting my money on the line here, that you will not only build a great business, but more importantly, you will build teams and individuals that will build the business for you. Right? So this episode is dedicated to aspiring leaders or managers, to newly appointed leaders or managers, and leaders or managers who have taken over new teams in whatever sphere of the economy that you operate in. Let's get going. Coins. The C stands for connect. Now, I want to admonish and encourage that every new leader, especially if you're coming in or you're taking over a new team, the first 3 months, 90 days of your role are absolutely critical in you making a real, intensified and intentional effort to connect with your team, both at the team level, but more importantly, at an individual level. Why? Because we are human first before we are employees, workers, or colleagues. We are not robots where you can press buttons and therefore output just gushes out like water from a rock. I hope you're following me on this one. People volunteer their best work when they feel valued, seen, and appreciated for who they are, particularly where they are working. Let me repeat that. People volunteer their best work when they feel valued, seen, and appreciated for who they are. So it is imperative then to connect first at a human level. And I want to give a tip here. Pause for a moment and give a tip here. If you're newly appointed in your role or into a company and you are a manager of other people, please make it your priority to connect with your boss, your leader that appointed you, or whoever it is that you may report to, so that you understand what his or her priorities are, right? Understand, there's a reason why they appointed you to begin with, right? So be upfront and align on what matters to them, what matters to your leader, what are the business priorities, right? Be intentional and genuine about it. And secondly, be intentional about connecting with your team of colleagues that you're going to work with that report into you. Make this your personal priority within the first 3 months. I dare say within the first month of your appointment. Be intentional about it, and most importantly, be genuine and authentic about it. Let this not be a tick box exercise. I want to pause here and say, I'm in exactly the same position right now. I've just rejoined a company I used to work for, wonderful company, taken over a new team, the beginning of the month, and I am extremely painful about engaging with each individual colleague on a personal one-on-one level. And that's exactly what I've been doing. And the aim of this is to really build relationship before we can build the business. I hope this makes sense to everyone that is listening. Let me close this one on the following few points. This particular exercise takes priority over every other engagement that you might want to have. It takes absolute priority. Don't get carried away by the excitement of being new and doing this, that, and the other. Schedule regular engagements with each team member in your diary and do not miss them. If something comes up, communicate on time and reschedule accordingly. Lastly, last 2 points on connect. Connect with your internal stakeholders, schedule those appointments with them, as well as connect with your customers. Do this within the first 30 to 90 days of your appointment. Let's move on to the O. The O stands for observe. And at this point, I want to employ the analogy of a soccer coach. And I want to call this part of the principle, the touchline principle. And those colleagues or friends who are listening to this will understand, particularly those who follow soccer, or at least you may have taken in one way or another, some interest, or you would have watched a soccer match at some point or another. The touchline is the place just outside the field, normally where the coaches love to stand and watch the game at play, right? So they would have had the coach would have had an engagement with their team prior to the match, and they would have briefed the team, and they would have drafted the lineup, and these are the guys who are going to be in the starting lineup, and this is, most importantly, this is the game plan that we are going to employ for this match and for this particular opponent. It is therefore imperative then, and you will see it in any game, the coaches never stay in the change room while the match is playing. The coach is always on the touchline. Why? Because the coach is very much a part of the game. You've got to be intentional about observing the game in motion so that you can intentionally study your players and spot their unique talents at play. Take notes for coaching and feedback at a later stage, right? And you do this as well. You go back to the touchline, or you remain by the touchline. Why? Because you want to, as a coach and as a leader, you want to witness firsthand what each player can do on the field of play. You are not going to get all the intel you need from just a meeting, or from a boardroom meeting, or from an office setup. You've got to be in the field of play, observing intentionally your players at work or on the field of play. This also allows you to gather intel and insight on the unique genius of each of your players. Lastly, on observe, take time to consider how each player's unique genius can contribute to the growth and success of your team. Let's move on to the I. The I stands for inspire and ignite. Now, you've got to be, I know I've used this word quite often, but I think it's important to emphasize the point. You've got to be intentional about what matters to each player based on their unique talents and drive. So in other words, what is their unique talent and what drives each individual player or colleague? Because this will differ, as you can imagine, from one player or team member to another. It's not a one size fits all. One size fits all does not work. Again, you've got to be specific in commending or complimenting and acknowledging the great things and improvements that each team player or team member is displaying. Let me say that again. You've got to be specific in commending and acknowledging the great things and or improvements that each team member is displaying on the field of play. Be consistent and genuine, both privately and publicly. Very, very important. You've got to be consistent. Otherwise, you cannot ignite or inspire as a once-off. It's not a once-off. You've got to apply yourself as a leader or as a manager to this. Be consistent and genuine, both privately and publicly. The last 2 points on ignite and inspire. Learn to admire publicly and admonish privately. I want to say this one again. Admire your team members publicly when you're having the opportunity to do so, and admonish them privately. Why? Because people love to be praised publicly, but hate to be embarrassed publicly. I wish we had more time to delve into this one, but I know if you are a follower of this podcast, you understand exactly where this one is coming from. Let's move on to the N, the second last of the coin's principle. The N stands for nurture. Nurture. Now I know it sounds at face value very motherly and very soft and very caring. And perhaps there are elements to learn out of that, right? But this is where I'm coming from by the nurture principle. You've got to tailor-make a clear and specific coaching plan for each player based on the intel that you have gathered at the connection and observation phase of your journey with your team. In other words, from the intel you gathered from being on the touchline. Tailor-make, let me repeat this, tailor-make a clear and specific coaching plan for each player in your team based on the intel that you gathered from the connection and observation phase of your journey with each player. Some of you are listening and are saying, is this what it takes to lead or manage a team? Absolutely. It's nice to get the bucks, but you've got to do the work. And this is the most important work of any leader or manager. Let's carry on with nurture. Take time to debrief and offer feedback on your observations to each team member or player. So once you've observed them, once you've been on the touchline, regularly enough, that's part one of it. But you got to take it further, because you would have taken notes and ensure that you give feedback. I live by a principle that says, feedback is the breakfast of champions. So you've got to debrief and offer feedback, specific feedback to each one of your team members. And in your giving feedback, you gotta ask meaningful and thought-inspiring questions, such as the following. And I'm going to give you just a few examples of some of those questions that are open-ended, but that are thought-inspiring, that you could ask in helping unlock possibilities, in helping unlock the potential of each and every one of your team members. Questions such as, what is your take about this game or this interaction? Questions such as, what do you want to achieve and why? Or you could ask, what did you learn from this interaction or performance? Or, what is your take on your own performance thus far? Or you could ask, what does support look like for you? What does success look like for you? Or finally, you could ask, what do you believe you can do better in order to achieve the goal that you have set for yourself? Now, folks, I'm not claiming these are all the possible questions you can ask, and I'm just offering a few as a guideline for you to have a more meaningful engagement and interaction with each one of your team members. The idea is to ask thought-inspiring questions that lead to growth. And this leads us to the very last of this principle, the very last bit, the S of the coins principle. The S stands for stretch. Now, what do we mean by this? Once a shift in mindset and performance becomes visible, tangible, and consistent, it is now time to elevate the engagement to more growth-orientated interactions. Can I repeat that? Once a shift in mindset and performance becomes visible, tangible, and consistent, it is now officially time to elevate engagement to more growth-oriented interactions. And in this vein and in this context, you've got to ask questions now that point towards what the next level looks like for each individual player. And of course, I'm being very deliberate in in putting it, in phrasing it in this manner. Why? Because this next level, quote unquote, will look very different one from the other. For each and every one of your players or colleagues or team members, it will look different. So do not make assumptions, and rather be clear and ask the questions. Of course, by now you would have gathered the intel, you would have connected, you would have had a better understanding of the growth aspirations of each individual player. But you've got to be intentional in asking the relevant questions, as it were. So one question will not sound the same for one colleague as it does to another. Therefore, copy and paste is not going to work, right? Carrying on this one, you've got to align with each and every one of your team members, align on what the growth milestones are, so that there is no confusion on the journey. Furthermore, you've got to make time to offer stretch assignments, and or tasks that are relevant to the growth aspirations of each player. I cannot emphasize this, even more. A coach or a leader and a manager, at the heart of it, has to work and coach and mentor such that individual players, get to a point where they are inspired to grow, but more importantly, that you are so in tune with the growth journey of each individual that is in your team that the stretch assignments that you offer them or that you avail to them are such that they are aligned to the growth aspirations and the growth journey of each individual player that is in your team. The other thing that I will encourage you to do is to consistently create context that is aligned to growth milestones and aspirations in order to minimize frustration. What do I mean by this? So do not just offer what in your view would be a stretch assignment if you have not been consistent in the growth journey of that individual, as well as where they are in that wealth journey, and if you have not shaken hands consistently up to this point, because what's going to happen is if you just say, I need you to do over and above your core role, I need you to do X, Y, and Z, it's going to come as a shock, because the individual will not have expected. Why? Because they may not be clear at that point that they are actually making progress towards their growth aspirations. I trust this makes sense. Lastly and finally, the last point, as a leader, as a manager, as a coach, recommend or co-opt players who are ready for their next opportunity or assignment or role. So what do I mean by this? It may just happen that in your team or in your business unit that you are the head of, you may not necessarily have an assignment or an opportunity or a role or a task that is fitting for the growth aspirations of a colleague or a team member or a player that you have deemed ready to assume the next level or the next level of their growth aspirations. So it is then critical for you to have built and made solid relationships with fellow colleagues and other BUs or business units that may have opportunities, or if not firm opportunities or vacancies, but at the very least that whose type of work or whose type of business is in line with the growth aspirations of those individuals in your team that you deem ready for that next opportunity. I hope this makes sense, right? So it is then at that point your opportunity to recommend or to co-opt players who are ready for their next opportunity or assignment or role. Friends, While I know that this may not be a finite science, in that there may be many other ways and many other coaching philosophies or tools that certainly a leader or a manager or coach can use. But I promise you that it does lend itself to very practical ways through which to unleash the potential of each member of your team. Friends, family, that's it for this week's episode of the Simply Lebo podcast. May the month of June be your best and most fulfilling month yet. A tada.